My younger brother, the golden boy, ruined my business, so I cut ties with this toxic family. Years later, they tried to invest again, but I just laughed at them. I am 33 years old, female, and have not had contact with my parents for the past 3 years because my younger brother, 30 years old, male, convinced our parents a few years ago that investing in my business was a bad idea and told them to withdraw at the last minute after I had already resigned. Let me be clear, I hate my brother, and it's not just because of what happened a few years ago. I've hated him ever since I realized that my parents always loved him more than me. He was always the golden boy, and I was never anything. My parents are immigrants, and in our culture, men are almost kings, so we were never treated equally. They didn't even pretend to treat us equally. I knew perfectly well that he would always be more important to them than me. My parents are very traditional. They think that a woman's only duties are to do the housework, get married, and have children. I always knew that they had originally expected the first child to be a boy, but instead I was born. I wouldn't say they were downright cruel to me, but it was clear that they had a certain bias when it came to my brother and me, and that bias was always in his favor. It might have been better if my brother wasn't such a massive asshole, but unfortunately he was. He always knew that no matter what happened, my parents would love him more, and he shamelessly exploited that. Whenever I achieved something, he'd constantly steal the limelight to make sure it was always about him. For example, on my 18th birthday, he decided to announce that he was dating a senior at university and planned to drop out of school and be with her. Shamelessly exploited it, and whenever I achieved something, he would constantly steal the limelight to make sure that every day was about him. For example, on my 18th birthday, he decided to announce that he was dating a senior in college and planned to drop out of school and move in with her. Obviously, this would send any parent into a fit of hysteria, and indeed it did. Not to mention the friends and relatives at the party hearing his crazy announcement. None of this was true, but it didn't matter because he had already ruined my birthday. So you can imagine what kind of person he is. He's a horrible person, and I still despise him. I swear, once I move out to college, and once I go to college, I will never come home again unless I absolutely have to. My parents don't seem to miss me much either. They have their golden boy and girl, and that's enough for them. Even when he moved out to college, his farewell ceremony was more grandiose than mine. My farewell party was attended only by my family and a few friends, while they threw a huge party for him, inviting everyone they knew and even renting an upscale restaurant to celebrate the occasion. I had no expectations of my parents. I knew that once I became an adult, I would have to fend for myself, and they would never be willing to spend money on me. The only reason they were willing to pay for my college education was because they thought my father was rich. I was actually quite happy that they were financially well off, because it would have been a waste of money for them to send me to college, because after I graduated I would only get married and have children. But I begged them to let me go to college, and said that if they agreed, I would be eternally grateful to them. I think the reason they paid for my college was because they wanted to have some control over me. That's just a guess, but I think it's pretty accurate. I graduated from business school with honors, so I was able to find a job pretty quickly after graduation. Once I started earning money, I told my parents that I would eventually pay them back everything, but not right away. And they were a little disappointed because they had expected me to start looking for a husband right after graduation so that I could settle down and start a family. My mother is still actually against the idea of me working, saying it would be safer for me to just start looking for a man to marry, because if I get old and rich, he will be willing to marry me. Yes, I know it sounds like a nightmare, and it is, but that's just the kind of people my parents are. I don't know why they are like that. I guess they were brought up that way, but you can always change your mind. I guess they never bothered about it, but I explained to my mother that times were changing and that it was more important for me to be independent than to start a family. They were angry with me for a few weeks, but when they realized that it didn't affect me at all, they got back to normal and we resumed our normal parent-child relationship. By that time, I had already started to pay back the money because after working for a few years, I had a stable job and a decent income, and by living frugally, I managed to pay off all my debts. After that, I felt that there was no need to maintain a close relationship with my parents because I realized more than ever that they were the only ones who were concerned. We would occasionally have lunch together or maybe meet up at family gatherings, but since paying off the debt, I began to reduce contact with them because I always felt very oppressed when I was with them, because they would constantly urge me to find a husband and get married as soon as possible. So I began to reduce the number of times I went to their house. Another reason was that whenever we met, they would brag nonstop about my brother, saying that he had graduated from business school, but he was nowhere near as good as me. As far as I know, he was a terrible student and wasted years partying, so I don't know what my parents were bragging about. It was annoying because they never bragged about me, even though I'm in a much higher position than him and earn much more. My brother can't even find a job on his own. My father had to hire him, which is basically just an obligation. He does hardly any work but still gets paid, so I don't feel like there's anything to brag about. But anyway, I'm used to my parents' attitude towards me, so it's no surprise that they don't contact me. The only reason is that I owe them money. It feels strange not to get in touch, but after things settled down, I started focusing more on my work, and they didn't try to get me to see them more often, so we gradually drifted apart. But a few years later, one of my colleagues and I started brainstorming and decided to start our own business. After careful consideration, he and I even settled everything before I contacted my parents. We had a well-thought-out business plan because I didn't want to go to my parents as their daughter, but as a potential businesswoman seeking investment. At the time, I hardly spoke at all, and it was difficult for me to ask them for money, but I knew that my father was at least an excellent businessman, and his sharp eye would really help us. My partner also thought it was a good idea, and most importantly, they were our safest bet, so I asked my parents to invest. They were impressed with the plan my partner and I had come up with. They didn't feel at all that they were doing business, and although they had been out of touch for many years, they knew and respected me purely for business purposes. If my idea had not been so brilliant, I don't think they would have even agreed to invest in my business. Obviously, they didn't care that I was their daughter, but my father did like to make more money, so he agreed, but unfortunately, it was only a verbal agreement. He said he would only do it in legal documents and stuff like that, so he had the lawyers do due diligence, and we came up with something more practical than the business plan. So for a few months, my partner and I continued to work while running our business. Because we had several potential investors, and my parents were willing to make the biggest investment and contribute the most. In order to impress them and get them to continue investing, we had to work very hard, which took us a few months, but we were almost finished. 75% of the work was complete when I found my father again, and he said he was impressed and finally agreed to the written documents my partner and I had proposed. Just a day after my father said he would invest and give us a check, it never happened because a few days later my parents called me back to their house and said they had reconsidered everything and they were not willing to invest in my business anymore. I still remember that conversation. I remember feeling like the world had come to an end because I couldn't believe they had just left me hanging like that, and just a week ago they had been so supportive of my plan. I knew something was wrong and I had to find out what, so I kept pressing them until they finally told me that they had spoken to my brother, who had told my father that he didn't think my business was investable and would fail. So my father had backed out based entirely on his word. I was shocked, so I asked them why my brother hadn't told me about this before. My father told me that my brother had obviously thought about it for a long time, but he wanted to see what plan I would come up with before making a decision. I immediately realized that my brother hadn't actually considered the issue, but was just thinking about how much of a blow it would be to me if he decided at the last minute to sabotage my plans. And that's exactly what he did. Like a sneaky little snake, he waited until I'd done most of the work before telling Dad that he thought it was a bad idea and would fail, so Dad would give up and I'd be completely screwed. He timed it perfectly to ensure that I was in an extremely difficult position. I went to my parents' house that day and lost my temper, telling them to go jump off a cliff. I also said a lot of terrible things about them and my brother, and then went home to rethink what to do next, because my partner also had high hopes for me and I couldn't let him down. I told him what had happened, and I was so devastated that he comforted me. He said that if the company still wanted to keep us, we could still withdraw our resignation letters, but I had already made up my mind and was not willing to go back. So I started looking for other investors. We really needed the money because we had some bold ideas and our savings were not enough. So we did our best to sell our business idea to anyone who was willing to listen to us. After a few weeks, we managed to contact some investors who provided us with the much-needed funding, so we started from scratch. The first few months were the most difficult. There was a lot of work to do, and we had many sleepless nights, wondering if we were doing the right thing and whether it would actually work. But after a few months, we finally broke even, and since then, our momentum has been strong. There was no turning back, and it was all thanks to my partner and me and the hard work we put in. It was simple because we believed in our idea and in ourselves, and we knew we could make it happen. So my brother, despite his cunning plan, couldn't help me do it because success was my destiny and he couldn't stop me. The only good thing about this whole thing is that I no longer have to pretend to be on good terms with my family and listen to their nonsense. I knew what they were really like, but I was still willing to give them the opportunity to invest in my business because I thought my parents would be the safest place for me to hide. But I forgot how evil they are and how my brother had allowed them to get away with it. They had no business being involved, and I was glad they hadn't invested because I didn't want them to be part of my success story. They never even apologized for letting me down. At the last minute, we never spoke again after I stormed out of their house that day. I was secretly pleased that they didn't contact me afterwards because I didn't know what to say to them. However, they contacted me recently because they wanted to invest in my business. Of course, now that we're doing well, everyone wants a piece of the action. What happened a few days ago was on a Sunday, so I was at home. They showed up at my house. I've been living in the same apartment since I graduated from college, so they found me easily. When I saw them standing outside my door, I was taken aback because I couldn't imagine they had anything to say to me after all this time. I mean, it's been almost 3 years since it happened, and they've never even tried to contact me. But I opened the door and let them in anyway, because I thought they were going to apologize to me and try to make it up to me. Deep down, I was crazy enough to think they were here to actually make it up to me, but I was wrong. They just came to tell me that they finally realized I was doing well, and now they think my business is something they could be a part of, and they want to get in on it as investors. They didn't even try to strike up a conversation or ask what I've been up to lately. They just came right out and said it, and I appreciated that because at least they weren't wasting my time or making me feel like they were going to get things done. However, their optimism about this made me laugh, because from their expressions I deduced that they really wanted me to agree with them and let them in. I laughed out loud in their faces and told them that this was impossible and that they could go, because we had nothing more to discuss. After the discussion, my father was so shocked that he started to look for words to explain how he felt. His face turned red, and he said that I had no right to insult him because obviously he was my father, and I had to respect him even though they had never given me any respect in their lives. So I told them that I was giving them exactly the same respect that they had given me years ago, especially since he had come as an investor and businessman and not as my father. My parents were shocked and I could see that they wanted to argue with me, but I wasn't in the mood to fight, so I told them to leave and said that I didn't want to accept their investment and that there was nothing wrong between us. My mother started crying and said that she always knew that sending me to college would backfire one day, but she just didn't think it would. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I just wanted them to leave, so I told them to leave again, but they refused to go, while my mother continued to cry on my couch, complaining that I had shamed them. She told my father that if they hadn't spent all that money sending me to college, I wouldn't have become arrogant and wouldn't have done anything they asked me to do. Apparently, she thinks that letting me go to college was a mistake, and that allowing me to work was an even bigger mistake, because apparently it is exactly that which has made me so arrogant and proud. Now she thinks that if I had done nothing but start looking for a husband, then I would have a family by now, but that is not the case, and I am in my 30s, still single, and probably never will have a husband or children. She blamed it all on my father and said that he shouldn't have invested in my business just to get me to listen to them, so at that point I realized that they had only come back here because they wanted to be obeyed again. They didn't care about me or my business, just appearances, and the fact that I was still unmarried and didn't have any children was obviously very bad for their reputation. They argued in the living room in front of me as if I wasn't even there. After a while, I had enough and told him to stand up and leave, or I would call the police. My mother then became even more hysterical, crying and screaming that I had threatened my own parents and that I had called the police, which was completely unacceptable. I became increasingly impatient and could no longer stand it, so I got up and threw my parents out of my apartment. I exercise regularly and am very tall, which also helped. My parents did not see my actions coming at all, so I easily managed to throw them out of the apartment and close the door behind them. After they left, I thought it was over, but a few hours later I got a call from my brother, who was very angry and even threatened to sue me because I had allegedly hurt my parents. I should apologize to them because treating the people who raised me and made it possible for me to achieve what I have today is ridiculous, because I have always been gentle with them and I don't think they were hurt. I also don't think it's illegal to throw someone out of your apartment, but my family is all upset with me now, and they say they're going to sue me if I don't apologize. I don't know why they're so angry, but they are, and dealing with all this hatred is really tiring. I don't know what to do now. Ida, for kicking my parents out of my house. Update 1. Hi everyone. It's been a tough week since my parents came to visit me and I kicked them out of my house. My brother has been moral judging me and my relatives have started a full-blown hate campaign against me online. At first, I considered apologizing to them so that I wouldn't have to face this hatred and they would eventually stop targeting me. But then I talked to my partner and read the comments here, and I realized that even if I apologize, the hatred will never stop. They will just find other reasons to hate me. There's also a good argument that an apology would actually make it easier for them to bring a lawsuit, as it could be seen as an admission of guilt. So an apology is out of the question for now. I think the only thing I can do now is block them and hope that this all dies down soon, because I really can't take the stress. There is something else I want to address in this update, because many people have asked me why I continue to stay in contact with them for so long after the way they treated me throughout my childhood. I don't have a definitive answer to that. I think it's nice to have a family, and as I said in my initial post, they weren't always cruel to me. We did have some good times, and that's why I stayed. Please note that I'm only talking about my parents here. My brother and I never had a relationship, and I'm glad to be rid of him. He was the devil incarnate, but I think you may have figured that out for yourselves. He screwed me over before I even started my own business. He had our parents quit when everything was ready, which was pure diabolical genius. I have to applaud him for that, because I don't think anyone else could devise such a devastatingly cruel plan and try to ruin someone's life just because they can update. So I decided to talk to my partner about what I wanted to do to my parents next. To be honest, I was just afraid that my relatives' posts would somehow get to my business partner, and that would really be bad for us. I was afraid it would have a negative impact on our image, but he told me I should ignore it and pretend it never happened. Eventually, my relatives will stop hating me. They must have their own lives too, and when they realize it doesn't bother me, they'll go back to being themselves and stop trying to annoy me. I think he's right, so I'm going to do it. A lot of people want me to express my opinion or try to respond to them, one way or another. Although I appreciate their help, I don't think I need it right now, as it will only cause more trouble. I just want to focus on my work and continue with my life, which is impossible if I keep getting into trouble. Even though getting into trouble with them is not important to me, it still distracts me, and I don't need it right now. In other news, since I blocked my brother 3 years ago, he contacted me through another number, and I decided to find out what he's been up to since then. I told all my friends that I didn't want to hear from him again, but now I'm a bit interested, so the last time I heard from a friend was after I had a fight with my parents and told them not to tell me about family matters. My brother still works at my parents' and dad's company. I recently asked a few friends if they knew what he had been up to recently, and they told me that he was still working there, which is crazy because for so many years he has been unable to get a promotion, which is a bit sad. They also told me that my father's company is about to be acquired, which may be one of the reasons why he contacted me, because he just wants to be involved rather than being completely useless. Of course, my mother says she wants to control me, and if they have a stake in my business, or worse, a majority stake, it would be relatively easy for them to control me. If they hold my shares, or worse, a majority stake, then it would be relatively easy for them to control me. But anyway, it's none of my business. I just want to know because I'm a little curious. They can do whatever they want. Update 3. It's been almost a month since I first posted here, and I did post some updates in the following days, but after that I became very busy and had nothing to say, because my relatives stopped their hate campaign against me. And after they realized I wouldn't respond, my parents and brother also didn't try to contact me, because I guess it's obvious I wouldn't apologize. I don't even have anything to apologize for. I just did what any reasonable person would do. So yeah, that's my family. My dad's company got bought out. I heard about it a few days ago from a friend of mine. They made a big deal about it, posted about it, threw a celebration party for it because it was obviously a big move. But I don't know if they realize that it does mean that my brother will probably end up losing his job, and in the long run, I can't imagine him being able to do it, and the only reason he's been able to keep his job is because my father is in charge. But once the situation changes, who knows? When he'll get fired, and that could be interesting. I'd love to know how they feel about it. I know it's not right to be happy about someone else's failure, but until then, I wish to see my brother fail. However, he can watch me succeed, and I hope they will continue to pay attention to me because I will only become bigger and richer, so they better watch out. But on a lighter note, many people have asked me if my partner and I have a story. It's cute that people want to find true love, but he and I are just good friends. However, I do have a boyfriend, and we have been together for a few years. I didn't mention it because I didn't think it was important and I was too busy being really upset about the fiasco my parents had orchestrated. But we have been together for a while now and it's going well. My parents don't know about it, of course, but we've even thought about getting married in a year or so. Guess who won't be invited to the wedding? Haha. My parents have finally had a chance to be decent for once, and they've still screwed it up, just like they do with most things.